Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Driving Optimism, a podcast about problem solving. Today's episode is about the surge in unemployment in response to the coronavirus and the problems it presents. I'm Jim Galindo. I'm based in Sydney, Australia, where it's sunny and about 25 degrees Celsius or about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. It's mid-morning. I'm still in my pajamas on a Friday. My counterpart on the opposite side of the virtual desk is Shane Nantes. He is in New York City, where it's early evening, and Shane is wearing a ball cap indoors to protect himself from the soul-crushing rays of dull fluorescent lighting. Shane, how's the climate outdoors in New York City?
Hey, Jim. Outdoors. I haven't been outdoors in about a week, actually, but it looks good. I have a window, and it looks dark, but there might be a star or two in the sky. So New York City is good. In other news this week, I discovered the band The Arctic Monkeys, which I realized I'm a little late to this party. When I was looking in YouTube for some of their greatest hits live, this was like prior to 2010. But man, they're really good. Is this a band that you are fond of?
I'm very fond of them. I remember where I was when I discovered the band. I was sitting at the end of a hotel bed in Madrid in 2006 or 5, whenever they came out, and I was about to go have dinner with a friend, and I just had some music on, and then I heard this guitar riff that opened up, and it was
radio. Wait, sorry to stop you. Like, were you listening to the radio? Or you?
No, it was a video. I was watching music videos, and You Look Good on the Dance Floor started playing.
Okay.
And I looked up, and I'm like, crap, and I waited until the song was over to walk out. I was enthralled. And then I think immediately as soon as I could, I went and bought the album, and I was stunned. And I've seen the band a few times. I love them. So yes, they're great.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
took over a year. Speaking of fluorescence, my favorite song is Fluorescent Adolescence.
It's a good song.
So that's what I've been listening to. And if when wishes are horses and beggars ride, as the bad saying goes, we can use that as our intro music, because we really need some intro music to get this podcast
yes,
going.
Yes.
So back to the podcast today. Sorry for that interlude, but glad that Sydney is well. And I'm glad to be here talking to you about, we're still in season 1, and in season 1, we are really focusing on what's happening right now, right? And what's going on with COVID. And so there's lots of different things that we could explore. We've talked a bit about education and some of the dynamics of the family, but you and I both either, like every human, we love to eat. So we have that happening. But we also have, my first paid job was a dishwasher at my college. So that's kind of where I come from. My mom was a waitress for many years when I was growing up. I know you have family that have worked in the restaurant and service industry. So
I did as well. I worked in the restaurant industry for about 10 years during and after university.
Yep. So this, the economic side, so I guess the impact of COVID economically is going to be wide ranging. So for today, we're just really honing in on the U.S. particularly. Sorry, I know you're in Australia, but they're transferable. This graph we're looking at right now actually does have Australian data on it, so that's good.
It's relevant to many countries at the moment. So
correct. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Relevant to many countries. And I guess the other kind of context that I wanted to say, actually, I'll wait on some of the stats, but we will get into some of the stats and some of the news. And in fact, today, I know it's Friday for you because you're over there in the future in Australia, fancy pajama pants, I should say. But here in the U.S., it's Thursday, and Thursday is very excitingly the unemployment numbers day. And today the unemployment numbers were 4.4 million. And just to put that in context, the Great Recession, as it is called euphemistically in Australia, and even now I see it being called that more here in the U.S., but the Great Recession of 2008, 2007, 2010, however you want to describe it, 8.9 million jobs lost total over a 2-year period. So today, half of those jobs were lost in 1 week. And the total amount of jobs lost so far in the U.S. as of today, which is the 23rd of April, 2020, is nearly 27 million. So again, That is 3 times the amount that was lost in 1 to 2 years of the recession that we think is the strongest one in our lifetime so far. So just to provide some kind of context of 10 years ago, what the numbers look like and what we're dealing with today. And so I'm sorry, I'm really taking up a lot of oxygen as we get started, but I'll pass the mic in just 1 second.
It's important information.
If we're at 27 million, let's just say we're at 25 million, there is no less than 25% of that workforce that is likely service industry restaurant workers. So essentially, we've got 6 million people, or 2/3 of the jobs that were lost in the total last recession. 2/3 of the same amount of jobs have been lost just in the service industry alone in the last month. And of those jobs, we don't know how many are actually coming back. That goes to restaurants and whatnot. But that's the context of what we're talking about. And again, there's the kind of the chart. So, I mean, how has this news been playing out in Australia from your perspective of looking at U.S. economy? Obviously, hospitality is a really big focus in the Australian economy, and I think done quite well with care. So has there been any observations in the media or of yourself or your cohort of how things are going in the U.S. and if they're exactly similar in Australia, or what's kind of what's the word down under, man?
The conversation is pretty much the same as it is in the U.S. You know, I've been tracking both pretty closely. Restaurants here, you know, there's no bookings, as this chart that we're sharing currently shows. So for those that can't see a chart, we'll have it posted with the notes for wherever we publish the podcast. But the graph is effectively year over year change in seated dinners at restaurants from Open Table Network. And it's dove to zero in Australia, Canada, Germany, the UK, and the US. And so table service is a pretty important component of that, because it's volume and surges of volume over, you know, at certain times of the day. So it's pretty reliable and a predictable. You know, if you're successful in your business, you can forecast what you're going to make throughout the year at certain times, and you know your peak hours, and you can schedule resources well, and they can make money. You can, you know, have revenue. All that's out the window now. It's curbside or pickup, and even that's marginal at best. So the industry's struggling across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. But again, we're here at Driving Optimism to hopefully solve the problem. The problem is not going to be solved, I should say, by going back to what we were. I mean, I mentioned this in another kind of food-related topic I was talking about today, but short story economically, restaurants make very little margin, and so they rely on volume and turnover and essentially density and capacity, right? Seats turned over time. And so if you're going to cut capacity by at least 50% in most cases, probably I've seen more. I've seen people saying restaurants come back at under 50% capacity. So then you're also talking about, if you're going to cut the capacity by 50%, very roughly, I'm not an economist or a math person, but I do know equations. And if you're going to cut the capacity by 50%, you're going to double the prices. And therefore, but again, you're going to make yourself even less amenable to consumers when consumers now have been cooking at home, paying slightly less for food and feeling it was good enough. So, and they're making less money. So now you're asking them to go out and spend more for what they think that they can make themselves. So it's really a tough situation. Now so that's not the answer for restaurants, is going back to normal. So what we think is, we think that obviously there's going to be evolution in these industries. And the focus for today, particularly, is to talk about those who've come from service industry, restaurants, hospitality, hotels, what areas, as they start to go back into the workforce, assuming that they're not necessarily going to go back into restaurants full time, or they might. Okay, I want to encourage people to go back into restaurants if they'd like to. I've had this conversation with my cousins who work in the food industry about, trying to find a job over time that is more sustainable, or they can sit down, where they can have a moment to themselves, where they can use their skills and share their skills and not be worried about being displaced by a pizza robot. Pizza robots are coming. I mean, pizza robots are already here, actually. So with that context, what we'd like to talk about today is where do we go? I mean, how do you think about what you should do next when you come in from the service industry or from the restaurant industry? And I would just say, fast forward for everyone who may not listen to the entire podcast, there's actually good news here. You know, we see a lot of reasons, and you've put the skills up on the screen now. We see a lot of reasons why there's a ton of transferable skills from customer service to what needs to happen. So we're going to talk about the skills, and then we'll talk about some of the job fields in particular. So, I mean, Jim, what stands out to you on some of the skills here? This, again, for those who can't see it, it's like 2015 to 2020. But I mean, what skills on here do you think are most emblematic? Maybe you can actually read like the top 5.
Let's read the top. Maybe let's read the top 5 from 2015 and what they look like in 2020. So
Sure.
The top 5 in 2015 were complex problem solving, coordinating with others, people management, critical thinking, and negotiations. The top 5 in 2020 are complex problem solving again, which you and I both understand that, critical thinking, creativity, people management, and coordinating others. Sorry, that's my phone. So yeah, that's the top. I think, you know, from the top skills from my mind that I really think into context of what skills I had in my experiences in the service industry that translated to my movement into technology. And obviously problem solving was key. Critical thinking, I'm not so certain about how that applied in service in certain roles, but it does certainly apply. You got to be creative in your problem solving and presentation and marketing in the service industry. Obviously, there's a people management element in the service industry, and coordinating is a huge skill. I think also some of the things that I thought about were, I took some notes about this. Sorry, I'm just trying to find them because my memory is not there. Negotiations is a big deal because you got to negotiate with customers, and customer focus is big. Conflict resolution, so that's part of that negotiation. General customer service, being able to prioritize those things. And I think the service industry has a huge advantage over a lot of other industries in moving across industry because, you know, when I moved into technology 20 years ago, I think I benefited immensely from the skills that I acquired in the service industry of negotiating, conflict resolution, customer service, and I developed people skills that moving into technology, there's a large portion of the technology sector in 20 years ago that didn't have people skills.
I don't know, Jim. I think you're giving yourself a little bit too much credit with the people skills part. But if you feel that
cheap shot, well played.
If you feel it's appropriate, I'm going to let you go with it. But I'm just gonna...
okay. But yeah, I mean, those are, and then also within that, you've got some other skills where, especially in service industry, because of surge in volumes, you're able to cope well with increased capacity. You're fighting fires constantly, so that's a skill. You have to be organized. You have to manage your time well under those conditions. And there's that sense of urgency, and you know how to prioritize. Because in normal times you can prioritize one way, but in surge, and there's a sense of urgency to prioritize differently. So those are important skills that a lot of people don't have, and it's hard for them to learn when their day-to-day job is scheduling this, scheduling that,
exactly.
You know, trying to hit not really forcing a deadline. So it's, yeah, those are the skills that I think about. What about you?
So I appreciate that you're trying to prove your people focus by having the phone ring, but if you could just
yeah, sorry, I'll silence that. I don't know why
the rest of our
yep.
So yeah, I mean, are these the top 10 skills for across every industry? I'm not sure. I do think they're really interesting. I'd love to see things like creativity and critical thinking and making decisions and working with others as valued skills. And, you know, you're right. A lot of these, this literally thinking in your feet is part of the job description when you're in the service industry and working in a restaurant.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of this, you know, particularly people, whether you're back of house or front of house, the improvisational, the working under pressure, as you mentioned, because it's one thing to learn something in perfect circumstances. But one of my favorite quotes is, and it's very approximated and not attributed to one person, but calm seas never a sailor did make, right? And so you're not actually getting better when you're doing rote repetitive work and you're not kind of thrown for a loop and having to think, how do I make a decision in this situation, which is different than the situation I'm constantly in. And that's the kind of skill set that you do want. So I guess if we can look at what are some of the areas that are more prone to automation, because, actually before then, and what you're seeing now on the screen, could a machine do your job? I mean, this is at least a year, if not 2 years old. And so before any of this pandemic public health crisis, food preparation and service was already number one on the list for automation. But then you kind of go to production operations. I'm assuming it's kind of manufacturing and, having a few people in a line in manufacturing. Office administrative support. So a lot of times you get your bank tellers in here and mortgage brokers and other things, fintech types of things that will be automated. But even receptionists to a certain point, right? I mean, if we're having less people, or, and having less crowded offices, we're going to have less receptionists and assistants. And then we get into kind of agriculture. In fact, I was reading something today about where you're from in the Midwest in the US originally, and how that's actually going to be quite hard because, any recession foments automation. It just makes it go faster because you're not doing automation in an ethical way anymore. In a labor ethical context, you're now doing it in a cost saving context, which puts you in gives you the higher road, right? And therefore a carte blanche to do automation. So automation was already coming. It was really already coming. There was kind of technical reasons not to do it and maybe some heartstring reasons not to do it. But this has ripped the Band-Aid off completely. And so, while we want to encourage people I want to be very clear, the food industry is glorious and there's wonder in it, but it is going to change dramatically. And if you're thinking about getting into a new field, that's why we're here talking. It's not about saying don't go back into food, but, Jim's just scrolled down. And what we're now looking at are the jobs kind of least likely to be done by a robot. And then that would be kind of business and financial operations. And I really think implicit in there are making decisions within business and financial context. Then above that, we've got education, training, and library. And then we've got engineering and architecture, arts and creativity, kind of going back to that creativity skill being top and something that's really hard to scale or outsource. I'm not sure I really believe this building and grounds cleaning. That seems like something that could be automated, but perhaps in our new world, we'll want to see people cleaning, and maybe that'll make us feel better, and so on and so forth. So those are kind of the areas that are least. But I would say we've got about another little bit less than 10 minutes or so to wrap up. So I think you and I have identified some areas that might be good for people to go into, and I know you've spoken to a few folks that have kind of transitioned. So you yourself were in food service, went into the technology world. We do see lots of people who have gone into healthcare. So that wasn't really on that list. But Jim and I want to kind of strongly suggest really kind of three areas to look at. First being healthcare. Second being education, training, or I like to call lifelong learning. Because whether that's traditional K-12 education, whether that's cooking school, whether that's events and training and corporate training, or whether that's reskilling other people like yourselves and lifelong learning, all of these things are possible. And then what was the third area?
I think general customer service roles across the industry, assuming, there are certain roles that cannot be automated, right? So, but still customer service is an important aspect of many industries and it's highly valued. And so people in the restaurant service industry I think are very, very fit for those types of roles. And then that leads them into opportunities to move up in those organizations and take on different roles. So that's their entry gate to those industries, if you will. The other thing I want to add briefly, when you're talking about continuous learning, is some other things to think about are the skills that some service industry people might need to focus on to help them make those transitions. So something I think about is self-marketing. I don't think that's something that's taught very well, and service industry don't really think about themselves. So how do I recognize?
Sorry to cut you off. You mean personal branding? So how do you?
Well,
or do something else?
In terms of like
I love
building
that.
your resume, how do you market yourself as a viable person who's in one industry to move to another? Like that's a skill that needs to be learned. And then also focusing on continuous learning, because that's a valuable asset.
Yeah.
Not to you as not just to you as a person, but also an organization that wants to hire you. And organizations look for that. So I just wanted to point that out as well, that service industry friends and people in that industry need to really think about, how do I market myself to get a new job, translate what I'm currently doing to another job, as well as, diving into continuous learning and making that a way of life moving forward.
You know what I used to say to people when we had bookstores, and I don't mean like when we could go outside, I just meant when there was actual bookstores that were physical. I mean, I guess Australia has Dymocks, but when you have to say one name, there's only so many left. But I used to tell people, like, a great thought exercise was just imagine you're walking into a bookstore. So I happen to really like magazines, so I use the metaphor of the magazine section. But even if it's the overall bookstore, when you think about your career and what you want to do next, where do you gravitate to? Like, if you just walk into a bookstore, where do you wander? Think about that impetus.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That, like, innate drive in you says something. Are you going to the business section? Are you going to the spiritual section? Are you going to the health and food because you love recipes, you collect recipes? Like, whatever, like, life is energy, right? We believe that very much. And there's a draw, and you've got to kind of let your own energy draw out. And what we're trying to do is just, like, look at these layers. Like, what skills do you have? Where do you go in a bookstore? What's interesting to you, which kind of goes into lifelong learning? What do you want to kind of pick up? What would be great to learn anyway? What would you get paid? What would you learn and necessarily not get paid for, but be really happy when you got paid to keep learning about it?
So let me turn that on you then. So using you as an example, where your career went and how you've deviated from that, like, where are your interests? I know they're food, but
Yes.
like, is there anything outside of that? Or what was the lesson?
So, like, I mean, here's a good example for me. Like, I'll take it personal. So if I do that exercise on myself and I go to the magazine section, I go to, like, I'll pick up foreign affairs, and I'll pick up a monocle, and, like, so I'll pick up something kind of political. I'll pick up something business, but no matter what, I will go and pick up a home magazine. Like, I'll just pick up a redecorating magazine, a design, an architectural digest. Like, now that doesn't mean that I'm going to become a home flipper, but it makes me think I should, right? It makes me
Can I just start calling you Martha Stewart?
No, not Martha Stewart. Like a flipper, Nick, I'd buy a house and renovate it.
Oh, okay. I got it.
But, and I've thought about that, and that is a passion, but, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to become a profession, but I have used that trick on myself, and it forces things to the top that I might deny. Like, I normally don't go around telling people I want to have a second career as, like, a landscape architect, but maybe secretly inside of me, I do. And if that could be something to explore in a different.
Yeah, I think the other thing too to add to this is there's a prevalence of uncertainty, which breeds some fear about the future for a lot of people. I think focusing on and really thinking about, there's a courage you need to find inside yourself to put yourself out there, because if you don't put yourself out there, you're
totally.
not. It's scary. I mean, I'm at a point in my life now where I'm like, I don't care. I'm just going to put myself out there and see what happens. But some people aren't like that. So there's nothing wrong with failing. Just persist, keep going. And that's the mentality that not only is beneficial to you, but also beneficial to employers. So be fearless, put yourself out there. The worst anybody can say is no, and then go to the next person until somebody says yes. Think about it this way. A great example of that is Stephen King wrote many, many novels, successful novels, but trying to get them published or anything published, he always would take the decline letters and he would put them on a little nail, and they stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. And those are motivation until he finally got the one that he needed. And then he got published, and then he got published again. And all of those were little lessons about how he submitted articles. Every time you go out for a job and you fail, it's a little lesson to say, I'm going to change this and keep doing it until it works. It's frustrating as hell. It can be discouraging, but you have to persist. And that's probably my number one takeaway message to anybody right now is, persist and keep going. It's hard. Sorry. I felt that was important. I had to kind of go on a tangent.
No, I'm really glad you did. It is really important, that confidence. And hey, man, I mean, you're being tough, and I appreciate it. But you and I have both seen each other at times when we're looking for jobs, and it is tough. It can be demoralizing, depressing. And I love the story about Stephen King with the rejections and having to use that as motivation, because you really, inevitably, everyone is going to get a no. There's too few job openings and too many people. Right. And so I love this confidence, because I think that's very important. And honestly, the one thing I'll kind of put on that confidence tip is the way to develop it is just to practice. Go for jobs you may not necessarily like, where there's lower stakes and you can just get comfortable, because it is practice. And
I tend to look at my first 5 to 10 interviews as practice, because I know I'm not going to get them. I'm usually nervous and I'm not familiar with the questions I'm going to get, because I've been out of practice for a couple of years. And then eventually by the 10th or so one, I get it. So it's hard, but it's practice.
But as you said, you need those rejections. You need that information, basically. And that's what I tell friends to this day. If you really want this job, don't let that be your first interview. You need to go through lots of other interviews first.
Exactly.
There's lots of relationship metaphors people can make themselves, or we're not going to make necessarily, to how to get a job, and it's parallels to developing relationships, but you do have to invest in it. And I agree. I mean, I think leaving people with confidence and encouraging their confidence. And I guess that's why we made this podcast today. We feel so passionately about this industry and the people in it and the service that they've done and the joy they've given to our lives and the joy that they have left in their own lives. So we hope that some of this energy and some of this perspective that we give will allow people in this industry to have that confidence and perspective that they've got a lot to offer the world, because they absolutely do. And the world needs great people doing excellent work.
Yep. Yes, they do. Empathetic people, and most service industry people I know are pretty empathetic.
Yes.
Passionate.
I love that point. Empathetic people doing the right kind of work, right? Not just work for work's sake, but really value adding collaborative work. So,
yep. Shane, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, I think we might, I think this might be a good place to end for this week. And just as a heads up to our loyal listener base, we're going to do 1 or 2 more shows in this season around COVID, and then we're going to transition pretty soon and kind of to a slightly different format. So stay tuned. There'll still be more exciting Zoom backdrops to come. Perhaps the audio quality will improve over the next month, but don't hold us to that yet. And actually very exciting, we got into Apple Podcasts today, Jim. So I think it'll take a few days for people to search, but by next week, we really encourage all 10 of our listeners to both subscribe an Apple Podcast and leave a review, because the review triggers the algorithm to tell more people about the podcast. And hopefully that can help someone who may be laid off get a job because they heard this podcast today. And if that happens, then I don't know, today made sense.
Yep.
All right, brother. Well, hey, man, I will let you give your usual shout out, and I will then close with my usual shout out, and we'll wrap it up for today.
I guess, today my usual shout out is, I just want to say I'm thinking about all my friends who are really impacted by this, not just from a health perspective, but also my healthcare worker friends, because I've been in the healthcare industry for a long time, but also the service industry peers, former colleagues, and all those that I don't even know about. Like, I understand and I worry about you, and I want you to fight and solve this problem and identify the inputs to that problem and just keep working and persisting to get through it. It's going to be tough. And the only thing I can help with is these little nuggets of experience that may be a lesson for you. And I have much respect and love for all of you.
Respect. Excellent. Stay golden. And hey, if anyone does want to come on the podcast and talk to us or with us about what it's like to kind of transition, we're all ears. So reach out to Jim or I, and we'll definitely have another conversation. But respect back to you, partner, there in Sydney. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your pajamas, and hopefully a beer or two in the near future. And we'll check in again next week.
Yep. Same to you, mate. Take care.
Right. Stay golden.